We've all probably played an MMO at some point, where you're in the middle of a boss fight and suddenly a giant red circle appears on the ground beneath your feet. It's not hard to figure out that you probably shouldn't keep standing there. These are called Telegraphs, and they tend to get a bad rap in some games because people claim that they can make combat too predictable and break your immersion in the world. Now, Pantheon Rise of the Fallen bills itself as a challenging and immersive game, but there also seem to be some telegraphs in its combat system. So it's one of those things that makes you go,
This is BazgrimTV. Learn, laugh, level up.
If you're looking for more informative videos about Pantheon, hit the subscribe button now if you haven't already, because this channel is completely dedicated to that. I'm not a developer, I'm just a guy who spends a lot of time gathering information from the Visionary Realms team so that I can pass it along to you in a way that's just quicker and easier for you to understand, so you can stay more up to date with the development process. So with that in mind, let's get right into it. This is a well-documented boss fight in Pantheon. It takes place in Halnir Cave against Nashura, and it's tuned for a full group of roughly level 20 characters. Now, I've studied footage of this fight, I've even completed it myself with the devs when they are demoing it at TwitchCon. And almost every time this fight is streamed on Twitch, and he performs this ability called Writhe, which animates these big circles on the ground, I invariably see comments like these ones. And to be honest, they're pretty ridiculous for various reasons, one being that this actually isn't even a telegraph at all. Because by the time you see this circle, if you're already standing in it, you're already taking heavy damage. And that's a key difference because, yes, you can realize that and move out of it, but you've already paid the price. It didn't give you any advance notice. Although, there is actually something else going on here because before he activates this ability, you can hear him say this. Oh, and by the way, for those of you who play without audio, he also says it in chat. But I point this out to say that there are multiple kinds of telegraphs in games, whether they be audio or visual. And in this case, this audio telegraph gives you a little warning so that you have a chance to react accordingly, but it's really only useful if you know what it means. If you hadn't watched any of this before, the first time you walk in there and he yells, you're probably not going to know what happens next, and that's going to hurt. But once you make that connection, you learn what you need to do to counter those abilities. But I think the question people are really asking are, will there be giant red circles on the ground warning you ahead of time of exactly where the powerful abilities are going to be landing, so that you then have time to move out of the way? Well, in June 2018, creative director Chris Joppa Perkins appeared on the Voices of Terminus show, and there he explained what the difference was between an animation for an ability like Writhe and what he had planned for visual telegraphing.
I am generally not a fan of telegraphing. I am a fan of being able to know what's happening, and there's a difference. So when there's an AE ability that's damaging you, it's nice to see where the boundaries of that are. It doesn't have to be a solid glowing line. It can be, a little bit loose around the edges, and you're not quite sure.
Like a field of fire, almost.
Yeah, exactly.
The fire marks the edge.
There's a difference, though, between that and then before the ability has gone off, you see this blinking circle telling you where it's going to happen, and that I don't like. Now, here's the I don't want to say the exception because it's not an exception, but it's a different kind of telegraphing, and that is an idea that I've had that I want. We haven't even got around to trying it yet, but you will see it mentioned soon, and that is the idea that certain enemies have a devastating attack or a devastating ability that they can use, and that ability, that attack, whatever it is, be it magical or melee related or whatever it might be, or something in the environment that they throw or whatever, the telegraphing that happens there is more in the animation. It's more in seeing or hearing some kind of a build up where and you learn over time that NPCs that have a devastating ability, and what the reason I'm calling it that is because if it hits you, you're in trouble. I mean, this is the kind of thing that could one-shot, you know, a caster, or even, you know, some of the light melee fighters. Some of these things could one-shot anybody. And so these devastating abilities, I think there's room to have some kind of telegraphing, as long as it's organically connected to what you're watching on the screen in what the mob's doing.
And actually, since that interview, we've seen a real example of this. This is a preview of a devastating ability that's part of an upcoming raid in Project Fairthale. Now, as you can see, lightning strikes an area, and depending on how close to the center of that strike zone you are, you'll take immense damage, maybe get stunned, perhaps even die. So you can imagine, if this is just happening completely at random with no warning, you'd just be instantly dying again and again and again, and there wouldn't be anything you could do about it. And that just wouldn't be fun gameplay at all, because that's not challenge, that's just torture. But if you look closely, you'll see a 2 to 3 second animation just before the lightning strikes, where it looks like the rocks are floating up into the air with some static electricity around them. That is a visual telegraph. Now, if you're seeing this for the first time, probably your instincts would be telling you that something bad is about to happen, but you wouldn't know exactly what. Although I guess maybe you'd just be thinking that this is completely normal. But regardless, after the lightning strikes, it's not going to take you long to figure out what you need to do when those rocks start floating. Or even better, you'll be playing with somebody who has learned it before the hard way, and they're nice enough to give you a heads up. That's just one little way that the game can encourage actual communication and cooperation between players. Because the devs technically could have just put a red circle on the ground, showing you exactly where it was going to strike. But by taking a little extra effort to replace that red circle with a short animation, it accomplishes the same goal of giving you something to react to, but it's also more immersive, and it allows you to learn for yourself, rather than it just being incredibly obvious that every single time you see a red circle, you have exactly 3 seconds to move away or something like that. These sorts of immersive telegraphs reward not only those who are more situationally aware, but also those who are more experienced and have gone through the process of learning what the different animations mean. But I want to remind you that these sorts of telegraphs are usually reserved for the more powerful, devastating abilities. So you won't have to just memorize hundreds of telegraphs. That way, if you're really not paying attention like you should be, it's just a matter of time until you get punished. But if you do know what you're doing and you are paying attention, people will be able to notice that, and it's really satisfying to get to that point. Because that right there is an essential part of engaging and interesting combat. The enemies need to have powerful abilities to keep combat exciting, but of course those powerful abilities need to be balanced in some way. So there really does need to be some sort of system that allows you time to react to them, or else there'd just be nothing to learn. No decisions to make, and that would quickly get boring and frustrating, because combat would essentially just be happening to you, rather than you actually being involved in the combat. Because remember, moving out of the way won't always be your only option. In this recent developer video newsletter, Joppa went on to explain how you can evolve your abilities to act as direct counters to those devastating abilities.
When you see things like shield block, when you see things like the summoner's class passive of mana shield, and some of these other, even ones that we haven't even revealed yet, that have a little bit more active kind of response in mind, and I'm not talking anything like lightning fast, first-person shooter, but you have a 2 or 3 second window maybe to kind of see something and discern what's happening and respond. That's what those abilities are really built with those things in mind. And then ways that you're going to even be able to improve certain abilities like your shield block and whatever, to be able to take on, devastating abilities of a greater and greater nature, because, the devastating ability from a mini boss is going to be different than, max tier, max level raid boss devastating ability kind of.
Now, before some of you get too worried that the combat system is going to evolve into some sort of action combat, I just want to underscore what Joppa said about these reactive abilities not requiring the reflexes of a pro Counter-Strike player. A 2 to 3 second telegraph is actually a pretty long time in combat, and this is a style that they've been planning on since the very beginning, as you can see by this quote in the official FAQ. quote, the player will have enough time to react to what the NPC is doing, counterspell, deflect, move out of the way, etc. Combat is more involved and the player will need to pay attention, but it is not twitch in the way a first-person shooter is, end quote. The emphasis there, again, is that you just have to pay attention. It's more about testing your ability to make decisions under pressure, rather than your split-second accuracy. So if you just turn on auto-attack and pick up your phone and start scrolling through Twitter, you're absolutely going to pay for it, as you should, because this is a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. At the end of the day, those who will be most successful are those that simply watch what's going on, learn what it means, and figure out what they're going to do about it. So let's loop back around to the original question. Yes, of course there will be telegraphs in Pantheon, both audio and visual, but the visual telegraphs will be much more subtle and immersive, not flashing red lights on the ground. This is just one of the many ways that the developers are working to make combat in Pantheon more interesting and dynamic. And sometimes it's the little details like that that really make the game fun.